Hey everybody, welcome back to Meaning Forge. Today I have with me Jon S. Rennie. Jon Rennie is a talented businessman, engineer, and leader. We stumbled together talking about leadership in a coffee shop. I think we spent like a solid 2 to 3 hours longer than we intended, but we had a great conversation about leadership and about his books that he's writing and about his experience in both the military world and the business world. And he has some titles to kind of have in mind is I Have the Watch, Becoming the Leader Worth Following. And I have this book here with its recently published journal. So I must say it's been great to kind of work through this and kind of work in tandem with these things. Easy to understand, easy to work with, and highly recommend them. He also has another book called All in the Same Boat, and that was published as well within the last few years. So great books, great journals, and great leadership material that Jon provides to help coach and build people. And today we're going to go into his backstory. We're going to look into how he makes, embodies, and shares meaning in his life. So, Jon, let's get into the Meaning Forge. All right, Jon, welcome to Meaning Forge.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thanks.
I think we spent way too much time in the coffee shop that day.
It was really good. It was good to meet you, and we share a lot of common interests. So yeah, it was good, solid discussion. And I could have stayed there all day, but like everybody else, I get stuff to do to keep things moving with all of my different projects. So, but yeah, it was a really good discussion. I enjoyed meeting you. Enjoyed having a nice long discussion.
Oh, I appreciate it. And so here in the Meaning Forge, we like to kind of dive into people's backstories and kind of start to set the ground, right? To start to set understand where people come from, so we can understand how they operate in the present and where they want to go in the future. So the dreaded interview question is Jon, tell us about yourself, where you're from, and I guess some general high-level overviews of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I grew up in New England, in Manchester, New Hampshire, and same town. My grandparents were born, my parents were born. We were all in that town together. Blue collar family. Everybody pretty much in my family worked in some sort of blue collar role. No one really had gone to college, but I had two grandfathers that were influential in my life. Both served in World War II. One was in the Navy, one was in the Army, and they had a really profound impact on my life. They were just men of character, and I spent a lot of time just sort of listening to their stories, asking the questions. I was fascinated with all that they did in World War II, and like a lot of kids my age, I was fascinated with everything about World War II. And I loved the movies, I loved the books, and I found myself leaning towards learning about the submarine stories, the stories of the submarine crews and the submarine missions that they did in World War II. And somehow, even before I got into high school, like in junior high school, I made the decision that I wanted to serve in the Navy, that I wanted to be an officer on a nuclear powered submarine. And that was great to determine that at a young age, but then how do you do it? So I spent the rest of my years trying to figure out how to get to the fleet. How do I get to the boats? And that meant, going through high school, getting good grades in math and science, finding an engineering school, getting into an engineering school, getting a scholarship because we didn't have the money to afford me going to college. And then, and then getting accepted in the nuclear power program, going through the whole process of nuke power school and prototype and submarine school, and then getting to the fleet. And it was a long process, but I ended up doing it. I ended up meeting my childhood dream and served for 5 years in the Navy as a naval officer on the USS Tennessee. At the end of the Cold War, made 7 deployments, and just like the highlight of my life, and just to be able to do something so cool like that, something I always wanted to do. I did it, achieved that. It was great. And then I got out into the corporate world. So a lot of people, a lot of junior officers get out, they go into corporate work. And the main reason I got out was I want to start a family, and deployment life on a submarine is pretty rough for family life. So we made the decision, my wife and I, to leave the Navy, go into corporate America. I worked 22 years in corporate America, mostly running manufacturing operations. I ran 8 different manufacturing operations during that time in corporate. And then, and 6 years ago, I left the world of corporate behind me, and I took the next phase of my life, which was I became an entrepreneur. I started a manufacturing business, I'm making products for electric utilities, and absolutely love what I do now. And during that transition, I also started doing a lot more writing and teaching on leadership topics. And so really, this is sort of phase 3 in my life, I guess the best way to call it. So, for my life, it's been sort of 3 main phases. So it was my military, getting into the military. How do I get in the military? How do I serve? And then second, finding my passion again, which was, okay, I achieved my childhood dream. Now what do I do? And what I learned in that second phase is that I was passionate towards manufacturing businesses. I was passionate towards blue collar employees, and I wanted to make the best factories for my teams. And that's what I did for all those years. And then my third phase was being an entrepreneur, growing a business, making my own dent in the universe, whether it was through my books, through my teaching, and through my manufacturing business. So so it's kind of 3 phases in my life, and I'm in that third phase, which is a lot of fun. So
That's awesome. That is awesome. And thanks for sharing all that. So I guess now we kind of start to see the threads, start to like shoot out in different directions. And one of those threads is definitely this idea of like blue collar workers helping, leading, teaching. And I guess a dumb question I'd like to lean into is, what was a major story that your grandfathers told you that drew you to being a submariner?
Well, I think it was a sense of duty. Both joined the military for World War II. They felt that was their duty to do it, to protect the country. And there was a sense of duty, a sense of honor, a sense of patriotism that was sort of, a thread in their discussions and my discussions with them. And so it was almost like, there was between the, let's see, there's probably 9 of us between all the cousins and everything. There was 9 of us, my brothers, sisters, and my cousins. There was 9 of us. I was the only one who served in the military, but I felt led to do it, just, to follow in their footsteps, if you will. And I just felt like early on that that's what I was going to do. They did it, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to be the next generation that does it. So I think just more in general, maybe not something specifically they said, but more the idea of duty, honor, country, it's really nerdy. I mean, that's not really popular these days, but it really, really meant a lot to me. And that's why I joined and served. I wanted to do what my grandfathers did.
Yeah, I get that. The overlying themes, because I had a similar experience with mine, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I entered the military service. All the way back in like 2nd grade, I was somewhat interested in war and stuff, and particularly World War II, right? So that's awesome. So you did your time in the Navy, then you jumped over to manufacturing, and then you jumped over to your own entrepreneurial pursuits. And so I think we have a pretty solid foundation right now to move forward into the Hammer and start to sound more like a job interview than a Meeting Forge interview.
Okay. I haven't been on many job interviews, so
it's all right. Just a joke. All right. So I saw you bobbing your head.
Am I allowed to dance?
You are. You're all good. All good. Just dance along. So looking at the Hammer, we start looking at like influences of like these major influences really kind of start to connect other dots and whatnot. And so one of the things I kind of want to ask here is, what has been the most profound piece of advice that you received from someone when you were leading manufacturing operations before you started your entrepreneurial pursuits?
Yeah. I don't know if it was a one particular piece of advice, but I would say that I found one of the things I struggle with, and a lot of people coming out of the military struggle with, is finding my passion, finding my true north outside the military. My whole life, from being a young child to being a young man, was to go through this gauntlet of training to get to the fleet and to serve as a naval officer. But what do you do after you've achieved your dreams at 25 years old, right? What do you do next? And so I struggled, and I was kind of a little bit adrift for many years. So probably 5 years, first 5 years I spent in kind of departmental leadership roles, and then I got my first plant at 32 years old. And I was clueless. I mean, I was the guy in the corner office, the youngest plant manager in this plant's history. I was clueless. I've never run a manufacturing shop in my life. I thought I needed to have all the answers, but I learned through that process that, if you will, I learned that the collective wisdom of a team was much greater than anything I had to bring to the table. And so that first plant kind of whet my appetite towards leading manufacturing business. It was my first time to be captain of my own ship, if you will. And but it wasn't until my next plant that I really found my calling. And I'll tell you the story. I was a plant. I was running two manufacturing plants, one in Pennsylvania, one in Ohio, and it was in the middle of winter, and I was up in our Ohio plant, and I was staying in a hotel, and I was coming to talk to all the employees. And in this case, I was coming to talk to the third shift employees, and it was in the middle of the night, heavy snowstorm. I went to visit the employees on this third shift operation. This is an old manufacturing plant. It wasn't very airtight. There was gaps in the walls. I mean, it was cold outside. It was cold inside. And I went up to the second floor where we had this conference room, and I was exhausted. And there was a coffee cup, a coffee pot next to the conference room, and I grabbed a styrofoam cup, poured a cup of coffee, and I went in and I sat down. My quality manager was presenting, and I was going to present next. And what I had to present was difficult because that plant was losing money. And I was given a directive to turn the plant around or we're going to shut it down. And so that's what I was there to deliver, that message. Here it was, middle of the night, freezing cold. I'm sitting there listening to the quality manager speak, and I look down at my cup of coffee, and it is the most awful cup of coffee I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, there is oil floating on it. There's grounds at the bottom of the coffee. It's absolutely, you're in the military. You know what I'm talking about. It was the worst cup of coffee. And I was in the military. It's the worst cup of coffee I'd ever seen in my life. As I sat there drinking this terrible cup of coffee, I realized that even with all my experience, at that time I had 2 master's degrees, an undergraduate degree, all this military experience. I could be anywhere in the world working for great companies, maybe in an air-conditioned office someplace, drinking a Starbucks coffee, whatever. But I realized at that moment that I didn't want to be anywhere else. I wanted to be with these people. I wanted to turn this plant around. I wanted to do the hard work to make this plant viable and to turn it around. I realized right at that moment, drinking that crappy cup of coffee, that it was exactly where I wanted to be. I found my passion in that meeting that night, that freezing cold winter night it was in Ashtabula, Ohio, right by the lake effect snow, cold night. I realized right then and there, I didn't want to be anywhere else in the world. I wanted to be there for these people. And I think at that moment, I found my next calling. So it wasn't necessarily someone telling me something, but it was more about finding my passion again. And that changed everything. That night changed everything for me and the rest of my career. So I found my passion, which was essentially turning around problem businesses. And that's what I did for the rest of my career in corporate. Was they gave me the tough assignments. They gave me the plants that needed to be fixed. And that's what I did, and absolutely loved every minute of it. So it was a lot of fun, a lot of challenges. I mean, a lot of sleepless nights, but But I realized that my experience in the military made me want to do the hard things and not do the easy things and not the easy corporate gigs. I wanted the difficult projects, and that's what I got assigned to do most of my time. So.
Okay. I have to take notes as I listen. So
That's probably not a good answer to your question, but it's sort of
no, it's an answer. Yeah. So let me recap, just make sure I understood. So in this, like as you are like within the manufacturing and the corporate world, you find this passion about going to do hard things with good people and developing solutions using the collective wisdom that's found there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess to kind of dial in on that, and I am going to maybe push and prod. It may not be within 5 years that period, but instead, who has been someone who has offered you profound wisdom or that you've looked up to, and what was it and why?
Yeah, I think the big story that changed my whole thinking about what a leader is and what a leader could be was my first boss outside of the military. And when I started my role in corporate America, I was actually a design engineer working on an R&D project we were designing something that had never been done before. And we were trying to develop a product that would be safer than all the alternatives out there. And we were in a competition with our nearest competitor. They were trying to develop at the same time. So we were in an arms race, if you will. And I was the lead mechanical engineer in developing this new technology, this new safer technology. I was in charge of all the testing and all the lab testing and all the design and all the mechanical design and all the lab testing. Long story short, we get to the lab for the first test, and this is very visible. Everybody in the company is watching what happens on this first test. We have third party inspectors there, high speed cameras. We have everything is rolling to see that this technology works. And the first time I run the test, it didn't. It's supposed to. The design of this product is supposed to contain an electrical arc and fall and push all the gases out the top of the roof. Well, instead, the entire piece of equipment blew up. I mean, pieces everywhere. It was a disaster. And I was young. I was probably 3 years out of the military, 2 years out of the military, probably at that point. And I just saw my product just it was a carcass laying there, smoking, melted copper, melted steel. And all I could see was that carcass was my career, was over. And I remember having to call my boss at the time and to tell him that we failed. And we spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars. We got to the test lab and we absolutely failed spectacularly. And he asked me two things, or he said two things that it just has always stood with me. He said, number one, he said, "Do you know why it failed?" And I said, yes. And, it's a long story there, but I knew how it failed. I knew what I had done wrong. And the second thing he said was, "Can you fix it?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And he said, "Get back here. Let's get it fixed. And let's get back to the lab as quick as we can." And was interesting because, a lot of bosses will throw people under the bus when things go wrong. But he stood up for me. He had my back. He realized what we were doing had never been done before. And he recognized the difficulty of what I was trying to do and that it was likely that one of these tests were going to fail, right? And so instead of, throwing me under the bus, he took the blame with the upper management and he protected me and he got me back to the lab and he basically, he helped me get back to the lab. And when we went back to the lab, a month later, we passed every test. We were the first in the industry to have this technology. We received all these patents. We received all these awards, millions of dollars in new business, all because that boss stood up for me and had my back when things went wrong. And I think that gave me a sense of what an element of leadership I've never seen before. And so I've always been that boss with my teams, as they've struggled or they've had failures. I'm always looking to see, is it just a process issue or was it a person, is it a people issue? And I'm always trying to find give people the benefit of the doubt. And I always try to, have their backs when things go wrong. And to the point where I've stood in front of the fire and took the blame when things went wrong too. And I think that's the right way to do it. This boss taught me that lesson. So it was early on in my career.
And by the way, everyone, that is directly almost out of I Have the Watch. I remember that very clearly, having that, like reading that. So, yes, that is a thing that I find interesting, that we tend to gravitate towards people who give us, I guess, the right type of chance, and not just chances after chance or something like that, but the right type of chance. Like, hey, okay, there was a mistake and something happened or whatnot, go fix it. And then all of a sudden it's like, we go off and fix it. And it's amazing. So thank you for sharing that. And then I guess one of the things I want to dial in on is you found your passion, and and correct me if I'm wrong real quick, but it sounds like it is around helping people and helping provide good leadership to people. Is that accurate, or how would you rephrase it?
I would say it's bringing out the best of people, trying to fire up the people that are in the organization, release their potential. I would say this is the biggest we talk about the waste in if you're in lean manufacturing, the deadly waste, 7 deadly wastes. I think there's an 8th one, and that is not utilizing people to their full potential. And what I saw a lot in corporate were people on the sidelines. I'm just going to do my job and go home, right? So I would say what I wanted to do was engage employees so they could become more engaging, and they could bring their whole self to work, and not just their not just their labor if they worked on the shop floor, or not just their mind if they were an engineer. I wanted everyone to bring them full self to work, and so fully get people fully engaged and everybody moving in one direction towards an organizational goal. So, and again, that came from the military. On a submarine, we didn't matter what your rank was. You could, even the most junior sailor could do something wrong, and we would all perish. On a submarine, there was a shared responsibility and a shared vulnerability. And what I saw in my corporate days is that there was not this shared responsibilities. If things went wrong, usually, the lowest people got canned, and the higher up just gets promoted, right, and keeps getting their bonuses. And I really wanted to bring a sense of that shared responsibility, shared vulnerability to my teams, and that's what I did. I brought some of that same kind of mindset. So helping people understand what the true goal was of the organization, what our mission was, and then engaging even the most quietest employees to contribute towards reaching that objective and that goal. So I would say engaging people to bring their best to work every day.
And I guess the next question to kind of lead into that is, so you explained the experience about about driving late in the middle of a snowstorm to go talk to third shift, and the terrible coffee is the catalyst event of that.
Yes.
Of this passion, right? What has been the hardest part about pulling these things together? And actually, hang on. Say that. We're gonna go to the next section. Sorry.
Okay.
Happens. Some things are hammer questions and some things are sword questions.
I gotcha.
Okay. So welcome to the sword portion now. Now we get to talk about, you embodying meaning, right?
Yeah.
And in this case, embodying your passion. So now you'll see why I did what I did, because, in the last segment, you talked about how you had a catalyzing event with a cup of coffee, and late nights, they typically happen in third shift, and going to work on a problem place. And from there, you said this is your passion, again, to bring out the best in people and to empower them to be better, and into create senses of belonging and sense of vulnerability and shared camaraderie. With all that being said, now that you've made your sword, right? You've pulled together the attributes of your experience. What has been the hardest part about bringing out the best in people and staying true to your sword?
So yeah, my sword was ineffective at one plant, and I ran a union plant in Pennsylvania, and I spent the first 3 years I was there. We really made a lot of progress. We were trying to there was a big gap between management and the workers. It was a big us and them mentality at this plant, and this plant had been around for 50 years, and it was a long standing, the managers did management things, workers did worker things, workers hated management, management hated workers. And I was brought in to sort of fix that. And, and having a couple of successes under my belt, I had a sword that I thought was effective to be able to bridge those gaps and bring everybody together. And for the first 3 years, I would say we made a lot of progress. There was a lot of doubting Thomases on the union side. I really worked hard to be humble and to try to listen to the concerns of the employees. And what I learned there was just a lot of just a lot of negative, a lot of animosity towards past management that it was hard for me to overcome, especially being relatively young still, and I was dealing with a lot of older employees trying to, and I remember one employee said to me, he said, you know what? He said, you're a BB manager. And I said, well, what's a BB manager? He goes, I'd be here when you got here. I'd be here when you're gone. And there was a lot of people that there was some that got on board with trying to do things differently and trying to build trust between both sides. But then there was certainly a very large contingent of people that loved this negative animosity between the two groups. So I'll tell you how extreme I took it. So our best factory in the world was in Korea, in South Korea. So I decided to go visit that plant to learn what they were doing right. And I decided to take 2 employees with me. And instead of taking 2 managers, I took 2 union employees with me. And I said, you guys are going to come with me. Let's all see it together. And again, it was part of building a bridge and building a bond between these employees. And I remember, I was going around, and of course, this plant was phenomenal and was doing a lot of things right. And I was hoping to expose them to that so they could come back and see the possibilities. But what I learned early on is they would say, well, they were making excuses. Well, they have this, and we can't do that here, or they have this, and so it was a lot of negative energy in the visit. It wasn't the positive, bonding experience like I thought. And on the flight back, I remember talking to them. I was, well, what did you learn? And it was like, well, like the food isn't very good there. It was nothing that, it wasn't any real takeaways that I was hoping, this major bonding experience. But again, I kept working. Well, we, about my 5th year there, it was union contract was up. And I thought, well, this is the first test of how we're doing are we building a relationship? Are we able to break through and try to achieve some of the things together? Because I knew what they wanted to do. They knew what I wanted to do in the contract negotiation. Well, just then we got a new chairman of the board, and he comes to visit before the union contract. And he says to me, you got a union contract coming up, and here's the deal. He said, you will not leave the table. You will not sign an agreement unless they're paying a portion of their healthcare benefits. And so I'd already known that was like the hill that the union was going to die on. So I told the guy, hey, that's not going to fly. Let me tell you, that's the one thing that they're going to fight us hard on. I said, what are some other things we could get that would, be helpful? But he was adamant that they had to have this. And in my first meeting with the union to discuss the new contract, they said, basically what I knew they would say is that we're going to die on this hill. We are never going to pay a dime for our healthcare benefits. And so we had an impasse on day one and the negotiation. And I spent weeks trying to come up with other things we could give them to try to get them to move on the healthcare benefits. But at the end of the day, they would not move, and they went on strike. So they went on strike for 6 months. So so my sword, which had been effective all these years, suddenly did not work with this team. And I knew I'd failed when I one Sunday morning was getting up, getting ready for church, and there were my union employees were protesting in front of my house. So I knew I had failed miserably. So yeah, so we weren't able to come together. Eventually we did. We settled the contract, but it was a long 6 months. We ran the plant during that time with salaried employees, and it was very difficult, stressful time for me, my family, my salaried employees, and my union employees for that matter. They weren't getting paid, and it was a very stressful time for everybody. So, yeah, so that was a major trip and fail. But you think that you've had some modicum of success. You think you can use it somewhere else, and it doesn't always work out that way. So this was a case it didn't work that way. The culture didn't fit with what I was trying to do.
It's funny how sometimes it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah.
That's actually really interesting because like it shows that, as you said, that no matter what, sometimes you have that success somewhere, you think this is a winning formula, and then you apply the formula somewhere else, just like a best practice, and it doesn't jive. So and maybe I missed this. What moving forward after that event, what did you incorporate into your understanding of bringing the best out of people?
Yeah, I think. So I grew up in a union environment. My dad was in a union, so I remember as being a kid, being on the picket lines with him one time that they went on strike. So it wasn't. I was never anti-union, and I'm still not anti-union. But what I realized then is that what I was trying to do, which was, bring out the best in people and have everybody bring their full self to work. It works well in a lot of cultures, but there are some cultures where it just doesn't work. And this was a culture that it did not work at. And by the way, my Ohio plant was also union, in the same union, and it did work. And we ended up turning that plant around and making money and saving that plant. So it's just sometimes there's something in the water that where things don't work. And, and probably if I had another 5 years there, I might have used a new strategy to be able to get the best out of that team. But that was probably a little more autocratic and top down, maybe a little bit to kind of, to show them I was in charge versus, trying to work together. But at the end of the day, didn't have that opportunity. But what I found is that other cultures, what I had done in the past worked really well in non-union environments really well. So what did I do differently? I moved south and started running plants in the South again. So it seemed to work better for me.
Hey, sometimes that's a question I think we'll have to circle back to in the leadership, the crown areas, because you kind of alluded to it earlier, which is culture. Like certain cultures matter for certain things, and so you have to make hard calls in those environments. So, well, thank you for sharing that. And I don't think that was in the I Have the Watch book that I read.
No, but it is in.
But it's in the
second book. Yeah,
it's in your second book. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But that's still a great story there. And I guess before we move on into the pen and kind of shift gears a little bit with the pen, I guess it doesn't always have to be related to work or anything like that. It could be just profound wisdom or something that you shared and empowered somebody. So the question here is, what was there a time where you empowered someone to make a massive change in their life or to pick up their own sword per se?
Yeah. I think one of the challenges I had in in bringing this kind of culture to a plant is sometimes the management doesn't see it that way. And I think one of the things I've had to do was change out some management teams. And I think that's probably the hardest thing I've had to do is to when somebody just doesn't get it or, can't get on board with the changes you're trying to make, you've got to find the right person. So in some cases, I've had to, let go of senior managers in a plant because they weren't able to understand the kind of the new direction we were heading. And one of the things I've done is similar to what I I had happen to me is I found some young, young leaders that were hungry, that, were motivated, and I put them in charge of some really difficult projects and operations, and let them do what I got a chance to do at 32 years old, which is to lead manufacturing businesses at a young age. And so I've had a couple of great leaders that have stood up in those kind of opportunities. So, yeah, so I think, sometimes, you find that you don't have the right person in the role and you got to make a switch. And so I've had to do that in some cases. And again, I've found some great young people that can take over.
All right. Well, hey. Here we go. All right. So now welcome to the pen. So the close cousin to the sword is the pen. I think they're kind of made of the same substance in my own like little metaphysics, how I break this down. And so one of the things that I often kind of wrestle with is legacy and sharing your legacy and creating that. And so I think you've already kind of alluded to that. And on top of that, you've written a lot of things so far, a lot more than me. So you've written, I Have the Watch, Becoming a Leader Worth Following, all in the same boat. And then you put together this journal on top of probably countless blogs and articles because of your website. So you're already well out there. And one of the things too is as well as to start your entrepreneurial venture as a way to contribute. And so my hat is off to you. And so now 2 questions that really get after the essence of these things. The first question is 2,000 years in the future, Jon, you were long gone. What do you want the essence of you, of like who you are? What do you want to be remembered? What do you want that essence to be remembered, and why?
Yeah, I guess I would say that that I made a difference. That I made a difference in people's lives, and whether it was employees, my spouse, my children, is that I was there for them. I brought out the best in them, and and they see me as someone that helped them get to the next level, to open up potential that didn't realize that they even had in themselves. So I think, I don't know how many years in the future, but and hopefully, some of the books, withstand time. The first book I wrote is 3 years ago and it's still selling like crazy, which is wild. And so it's one thing when you write, you don't realize where it goes, So when you write, you're sitting in front of a computer telling your stories, and you just never know where it's going to go. In that particular book, it's in the library at the FBI in Washington, D.C. I got a call from the executive officer of the USS Tennessee, my old boat, wanting permission to use it to train officers on the current USS Tennessee. I've had police and fire departments using it and giving it to their employees. I've had small businesses, it was actually a chain of landscaping companies that gave it to all their franchise owners. But the point is that you just don't know where this book is going to end up and the impact it's going to make on other people's lives. And, leadership is, it's you create ripples, right? And they can be bad ripples or good ripples. And so I'm hoping that I will leave a positive ripples throughout the world just by the work that I'm doing, and the impact I've made on people's life is a positive impact on the world. And I think that's the best I can do, is to share, and this point in my life, I'm a little older, and I feel like it's important to give back and to share and to pass on some of the things that I learned that helped me be successful to the younger generation.
Nailed it. Great answer.
Great.
Great answer. Yes. It's a kind of a hard question to kind of wrap our head around sometimes, because it's like 2,000 years in the future. Like, how do you want to be remembered? So yeah,
there are people that, some leadership quotes of, go back, from 2,000 years that we still use today. But I don't know if my books will last that long. But there's like one book that has lasted that long that I know of.
Well, good sir. Now is time for the question, and I might have to limit it to not to ruling out your books just to see what else is out there.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Let's rule out your books for now. They're
Okay.
written, and maybe one day they'll be Dead Sea Scrolls or something. 2,000 years in the future, here we go again. They're doing an archaeological dig on wherever your final resting home place, whatever it is, right? And they're going to uncover something, some object. What is that one object, and why?
What is that one object and why? I guess it would have to be my stapler. And probably the strangest answer you'll ever hear. But when I first came out of the military, my first job was a design engineer. I mentioned that. And also they did such a poor job onboarding me that they put me in a cubicle with the lights were burned out above me, and I didn't get a computer for 30 days. The only thing that was in that desk drawer was a stapler that I have carried throughout my entire career. And because it reminds me of where I began and how I started my career, and that stapler has been with me. I had to have it repaired at one plant. I had a tool and die maker having to repair it, but I still have that stapler today. I would imagine that they will dig it up with me. And again, it's my kind of back to my roots of how I started, and remember that every person is important, and every job is important. And I felt I didn't have that feeling when I first started my civilian career. So it's a reminder to make sure that, I challenge my young people that they're part of the team. A lot of times we take our more senior people and give them the difficult projects, and our junior people, we give them grunt work. And the problem is these junior people have spent their lifetime getting to this point. They've gone and gotten, college degrees, advanced degrees, and this could be their dream assignment. And then we put them in a corner and make them do paperwork, and we don't give them those challenging assignments. So that stapler is a reminder to, make sure to pass on these tough assignments, give them opportunities to grow, give them opportunities to bring their best to work every day. So yeah, maybe my stapler. That's a weird answer, but I don't have a lot of things. I don't have a lot of things that I've held on to throughout my career, but that might be one.
No, that's a perfect answer. That's another great answer. Trust me, it is not the weirdest answer we've received on Meaning Forge. We've had happy pens. We've had discarded cups of soup. We've had pictures of family. A lot of pictures of family.
Oh yeah.
Journal boxes and stuff like that. So I mean, hard drives. So all good things. And again, that I think is always the better question. So thanks for sharing that, and we'll go ahead and jump into the crown and talk about some more leadership stuff.
Okay, great.
All right. So far in this interview, we have talked about where you're from. We've talked about kind of pulling yourself together in this moment, this catalyzing moment with a really nasty cup of coffee. Like, it's funny how nasty coffee can completely ruin a moment or help propel a moment forward. And if only I was sponsored, but I'm not. And so there's a whole bunch of other things there. And as you start to kind of looking at the tools that we use and the tools that we make, and we embody ourselves, and we find out where these tools, we stretch them, and we see where they fail and where they don't fail. And then it's all about coming and making a difference at the end of all of this. And so I guess you alluded to a hard leadership lesson earlier, which is around cutting people. And one thing I would like to maybe highlight and maybe briefly revisit is, how hard is it to manage and lead a culture? And how do you think you do that?
Yeah, so manage and lead a culture is it's one of the most important things about the role of the leader that's really unique. So no one else shapes a culture more than the leader does. And I don't think that we recognize when we become managers how much impact we have on the culture. So I think one of the things that you have to make sure that you're cognizant in when you're in a role, in a leadership role, is how are the decisions that I'm making, how are the direction we're headed, the people that I hire, the people I promote, how is that affecting the overall culture? How are people excited to come to work? Are they excited about the changes? Are they frustrated? Are they aloof? Are they disconnected and disengaged? So one of the things is just you have to have really good empathy if you want to be in a role of leader, because especially as it relates to culture, because and I don't know if it's just because I've been doing it a long time, but I get a sense when the mood shifts, like there might be bad news and I have to tell bad news. And I sense that it's, that people are down and you've got to bring them back up again and give them hope for the next, phase of the project or phase of what we're trying to get done. But I think managing the culture is the central role of leadership and a central role of leaders. But I would tell you this, I'll give you an example. I had to, one time I had an opportunity to, I shut down 2 manufacturing plants and moved them into one larger manufacturing plant. And my intention through that all was to bring as many people as I could from those 2 other operations and bring the best of each of those 3 cultures. One of the cultures was extremely good at being efficient and cost reduction. The other one was really good at passionate, good with customer connections and being able to have good customer relations. And the plant that I was at was really good at safety, had a really good safety culture. So I wanted to try to bring the best of these 3 elements into one culture. So I wanted to be really intimate with customers, be really safe, and be really efficient. So that was the goal. And mixing 3 cultures together, 3 different groups of people that have lived life a certain way and had some sort of a camaraderie in a smaller group into a bigger group was one of the hardest things that I had to do. And I'll be honest, I never really fully achieved the full goal that I had with the culture of bringing these 3 distinct strengths into one strength. What ended up happening is the plant that had the more employees, the one everybody was moving to, sort of had a dominant, there was more managers there was more momentum there. And I think that that was a challenge, bringing these three distinct cultures into one and not being overbearing for the local team that was getting these 2 teams brought in. So I think that's really hard to do. But I think going into it, I knew that was going to be hard. And I knew that culture was going to be an essential piece of what I was trying to do. And I think and one of the things I did is to try to elevate the importance of the culture of the 2 plants that were shutting down and elevate them even above my own plant that everything was coming into. And I think it even upset some of my, my local managers, like, hey, what are you're selling us down the river. Why are you embracing those guys? They're the new guys coming in board, but it's trying to elevate their levels in the organization. So it's one of those things that's really hard to do, but I think it's a lot easier if you have a cohesive team and you come in as a new manager and you move it in a certain direction. That I've done many times, and that's easy to watch the culture and watch how are people reacting to the new message? How are they reacting to the new direction? How are they reacting to my management style? Who's on board? Who are the naysayers? Who are the people that are that are trying to stop what I'm doing? So those things are really, really essential. So I would say that empathy is such an important tool in building a culture that, a high performance culture that is united towards a common goal. Very hard to do. And again, harder to do when you're bringing multiple teams together like that, but much easier to do when you have a cohesive team and you're sort of moving in a new direction. But empathy is a big part of it.
I can imagine in multiple ways, because unfortunately you just can't throw them in a submarine or a 30-day field training exercise to force out the kinks per se.
Yeah, you can't. Right. I mean, that's it. And everybody comes to the table with all their past history and their experiences and their hangups, their frustrations, their all the things that they have. They're bringing all that to the table, and you're trying to get everybody sort of moving in a certain direction. Well, it's hard to do that. I mean, I often say that people are messy, but that's what makes them wonderful. People, and I think we can be frustrated with the fact that we're not leading robots. We're leading people with independent thoughts, but that's the challenge and the beauty of leading people, is that they're so unique. Every person is different. They're going to handle stress different. They're going to handle challenges different. They're going to handle discipline different. So you've got to figure out what's going to motivate each one of the employees that work for you.
So what helps you maintain your levels of your ability to empathize and engage and do those things? Because I can imagine, just from my own personal experience, that having a lot of empathy can be dangerous, or I'm trying to figure out how I want to word this, but effectively it's, how do you also self-regulate? Because you can't just empathize at every level all the time. It's very difficult.
Yeah. Well, it is. I mean, that's one thing that's interesting about leadership, is that almost every leadership characteristic is a balance, right? The extremes on either end are not good. So I'll give you an example. If you're way too present, you can be seen as a micromanager. Nobody likes to work for a micromanager. But if you're way too absent, no one ever sees you. And so they think you don't care. So part of leadership is finding the balance in these different qualities. And so empathy is a great example of that, where if you're just listening to the people, oh, well, Jim's upset about this one, so I got to be careful to do this. You're focused only on the people, right? And so what ends up happening is the mission gets lost. And so as I like to talk about it, I say, the leadership is about the mission and the people, right? So you're trying to find the best result that's going to get you where you want to go as a company, and bring as many people along with you as you can. And I always say as many people, because there's a lot of them are not going to come along with you. They're not going to like the direction we're heading. I mentioned earlier, having to let go some senior managers, is that they were not willing to go in this new direction. They wanted to fight me. They wanted to say their way was better. And, it might be, but for right now, I'm in charge, and this is the way we're going to go. I mean, that sounds a little bit harsh, but the reality is, I usually give people, I say 4 strikes. Instead of 3 strikes and you're out, it's 4 strikes and you're out. So I give people another extra, opportunity to get on board, and I really, really try. But at the end of the day, I've got to get as many people as I can moving towards the mission, and that's what I talk about as far as, the mission and the people. It's as many people as I can.
I mean, and that's just how leadership is sometimes. I mean, even then, I always, for me, when I would approach my boss, or even when I approach my boss and I don't agree with something, I'll say, I don't agree with X, Y, and Z, but it doesn't mean that I don't want to help it make sure this plan is successful, or whatever the case may be. Here are my reservations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And I use reservations now as a word, versus I just disagree, or whatever. I say, these are my reservations. Like help me understand how these things will change, or something like that. And so
you hit the nail on the head. Sometimes we just need to understand the why, and that's me too. I mean, I would say that I need to understand a why. If I'm going to do something that I feel doesn't make sense, if you can explain your why to me, I can get on board with it better. And sometimes my employees are like that too, where they say, I'll give you an example. Simple thing. Wearing a seatbelt on a forklift, right? That's a safety thing. I want to make sure you're safe. I care about you, right? So a lot of times I'll walk out in the shop, I'll see somebody without a seatbelt, and I'll say, hey, you got to get your seatbelt on. And they say, oh, I just got on here and there. And then I would say, look, the reason I want you to wear your seatbelt is because I care about you. I don't want to see you get hurt. And if this thing flips, you could get crushed, and I don't want to see you get hurt. I just said my why. Instead of just saying, get your seatbelt on, I'm going to write you up. That's not the way I'm approaching it. I give them the why, and the why is I care about you. That's different than just saying do it because I said so. So I think when you understand the why sometimes, or when people understand your why, I think it helps them. And of course, you've built a relationship, they trust you. Then they're more likely to be, they're more likely to comply, because, oh, Rennie cares about me. It's a pain in the neck to put the stupid seatbelt on, but I kind of get where he's coming from. So I'm going to put it on, you know? And I think that when you get your why in there, I think it really does help with employees.
So now the final question before we move into summary and we go into final words and whatnot is, what's been the hardest part, or just the hardest thing in general to discipline yourself and help align your why in your actions?
Yeah. So I would say that at least in the beginning of my career, I had imposter syndrome. I mentioned earlier, I was come from a blue collar family. No one went to college. I didn't even know what an engineer was, but I knew I had to become one to get to the fleet and do what I did. So I spent a lot of time being an imposter, feeling like I didn't belong. And especially in the military, especially, you know, early on in my career, when I first got a plant at 32 years old, I'm like, what just happened? Who made the mistake and put me in charge, right? So I think, you know, now I don't have that anymore, but I think that's a really, really challenging thing for people when you feel like you don't belong. And, you know, what I would tell the leaders that are listening into this is, if someone promotes you in a leadership position into a management position, they've already said you belong. They've done the assessment. They feel like you have what it takes to get to that next level and lead that department or that plant or that call center. So they're saying already that you have what it takes. And so you have to go into that role knowing that, okay, someone sees that I have what it takes. I'm going to do it I'm going to do that. And show them that I, you know, make them proud essentially, and show them I do have what it takes. And so I think that was always a challenge with me, was feeling that I wasn't adequate. I didn't have enough training. I didn't have enough experience. But I think over time now, I'm old now and I've been doing it for 30 years. So now I don't necessarily have those feelings anymore, but I do look for that in young leaders when I see that I hear like them saying that, like, I'm not sure why you gave me this job. This is really more difficult than I thought. You know, it's like I'm hearing imposter syndrome, and I want to have that discussion early on because I've been there and I know what that feels like. So yeah, that's something. And I don't know if that's a typical thing for most people, but it certainly was for me in my career.
Mine as well.
Yeah, like, who made a mistake? How am I?
Who made a mistake putting this guy
How am I
in
out
charge?
to the deck of a nuclear submarine right now? How did that happen?
You did what? You put me in charge of $50 million of equipment? Are you sure about this?
Right, exactly. And the military had a great way of just saying, no, you're in charge. And you know, it's like, you know, in your case, all this equipment, expensive equipment. In my case, a nuclear reactor, nuclear missiles, and it's like, are you sure you got the right guy here? You know, so
yeah, I mean, and that's how it is. I mean, that to some degree, that happens everywhere now. It's like how you cope with that to a degree, and like negative self-talk and other things kind of come into play, I think, there with imposter syndrome. So that's a hard thing to overcome, and something that, you know, young leaders, I mean, even myself at times, I will experience some kind of I'm not too sure, but then I also like, hey, like, I've been put in this position. I just need to ask the right questions and get the right information. And then when it comes time, make a decision. And so then that's where I think it's in the decision-making that people lose it, personally.
Yeah, you're right. I do think that's a big thing as well with leaders. Is I sense that a lot of people have trouble making a decision, making the call. They're afraid to fail. They're afraid that, if I go down this direction, I'll never be able to turn around. And so they
piss someone off or something like that.
Yeah. Have I gathered all the information? What if something changes? And they what if themselves to death. And I had my first CEO in my civilian career was a very decisive guy. His name was Percy Barnevik, and he said the best thing you do in my company is to make the right decision. He said the next best thing is to make the wrong decision. He said what will get you fired in my company is not making a decision. He believed in being decisive and fixing it along the way. So make a decision, move in a direction, sense what's happening, and like, oh shoot, that didn't work out, and then pivot quickly to move to the next thing. And I've always taken that approach throughout my career. He was a great influence on me to be able to be decisive, make the decision, and fix it along the way. And I've always, and especially as an entrepreneur, that's a great way to live, because you're not sort of fixated towards this I often tell my employees today, I said, I don't even know what we're going to look like 5 years from now. I have a vision for what I want, but there's going to be opportunities that open up that I have no idea that, that I don't know about today, but I want to be able to be open enough to listen to those opportunities and maybe move in that direction if it makes sense. So being flexible and be able to be decisive and move in directions that make sense to the business and to the majority of the people. And that's, I think that's a big thing that leaders have to do, is be decisive.
Yep. Yep. It's the art and science of leadership. So
it really is.
We will now have to kind of wind down and go into summary. So let's go ahead and do that.
All right. Can I say something? Can I say something? As a fellow podcaster, I'm humbled by your graphics. So much better than what I do. So
well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'll give you the cheat codes later. Okay. So first off, thanks so much for coming on. This is my feeble attempt at kind of summarizing our conversation so far and really kind of dialing in on different themes and whatnot. And so again, like just kind of high level stuff. Grew up New Hampshire, from New Hampshire, a union town, or a blue collar family, right? And there's some union stuff in there.
Yeah.
And from that, you develop the sense of duty and patriotism through the story, through your grandfather's World War II stories. And from that, you decided your entire mission was to serve on a submarine. And that was your entire passion, purpose, and everything, right? And from that position, you then went to school, you got your engineering degree, all that fun stuff. And then all of a sudden the question was, why are they putting me in charge of nuclear missiles? Probably not a good idea, right? Yeah. You've met me, right? Anyway, so you land on the USS Tennessee, and there you have you start to fulfill that. You start to learn your book catalogs a lot of your experiences there as well, and those lessons learned from, I'm sure, those senior NCOs, because you can't get anywhere without them. And then you kind of start going you leave the military after your terms of service, like 5 years, and then you jumped into manufacturing.
Yeah. Started
working on plants and being the turnaround guy. And it's in those moments where a dirty, nasty cup of coffee is the catalyst for your new passion, which is to bring out the best in people and create that environment and empower people that way. So you start to do that. You start to cultivate that. You're solving problems. You're bringing together different cultures. I know that some of this is out of sequence somewhat.
Yeah.
You're bringing together different cultures, and you're also realizing the limits of your own abilities. And seeing where you're effective and where you're ineffective, and then learning from those things, because sometimes things happen, and then, as you say, people are messy, and that's what makes them. I think I may be extrapolating here, but that's what makes them beautiful, right? In their own 100%.
Right. Yeah, I say that a lot. Yes.
And so there you kind of start to want to leave a series of positive ripples in the consciousness of humanity, and hopefully make positive change somewhere. So it sounds like you've done all that. You've written 3 books so far. You are your own entrepreneurial adventure now. And you are leading teams in public speaking and all that other fun stuff. And thank you so much for coming on. I guess, besides the leadership stuff, and which we can talk about, I think, at length for a very long period of time.
Yes.
Did that sum up our conversation so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I think now, my third phase of life, if you will, is, I talk about that in my, and I have my own podcast as well called Deep Leadership, and in there I say that my mission now is to build a world with better bosses. So that's really my mission now, is to take all of the things that I've learned, all of my experiences, and share with the next generation of leaders, to so that we don't have one of my frustrations is that, if you still look at the Gallup surveys year after year, about 70% of employees are disengaged at work. And the main reason is bosses. The main reason are the leaders. So yeah, I feel a passion towards getting that number down to 30% disengaged. Cause I've seen organizations where I've had 70-80% engagement with employees. So it's possible if Jocko Willink says there's no such thing as bad teams, only bad leaders. And that's what my experience was in the corporate world as well. So I feel a passion. My same passion is for the people that work for these leaders. So it's still that passion towards the worker, a passion for the blue collar worker, the young employee. And I want them to be able to bring their best to work every day. And for them to do that, they have to have good bosses. That's why today I'm focused on a mission of trying to build a world with better bosses. And so that's the ripple I want to leave now, kind of going forward, is how can I move the needle in that direction to build a world with better bosses. So everything I do is around that now mission I have.
Well, I tell you to take your sword, your hammer, and your pen, wear your crown, and go off and do those great things, because that's that's a difficult task, I think. And just like meaning forge, right? Forging individuals, right, and creating some senses of the self and maturity and all other fun stuff is really important. Because that also deals with leadership and leading not only yourself but leading others as well. And so I wish you the best of luck in those endeavors. And just a few random questions here.
Yeah.
I guess the first one is, did you learn anything that you may not have known about during this interview, or did it highlight something that you may not have thought about?
Yeah, I don't talk too much about imposter syndrome. So that's something that I've learned. I didn't even know what that was, by the way. I heard about it probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I was like, oh, that's what I had. So I think now I know what that was. And so I think that's something that maybe I'll write more about, and because I think there's many people that find themselves in that position, where they feel like they don't belong, that they feel like they've cheated something to get to where they have, and so I certainly can be a help towards those people that have those kind of issues. So maybe something I'll write about or talk about, but I do think that's something that came out that was interesting. So
good. And then, what sports do you follow?
I'm not much of a sports guy, but if there was, I grew up in New England. I've been a New England Patriots fan since I was a kid, and they were horrible most of my life. So, and now they're going back to being horrible again. But so I had a little window of Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, which was
a solid period of time too. Not just not a little window, like a solid period of time.
It's so weird because we were so bad for so long, and I can tell you story after story of sitting in those stands and watching our team lose to the worst teams in the NFL. So I am not a fair weather fan. I'm a long time Patriots fan. So if there's any sports I watch, it's the Pats football. So
good. I appreciate your loyalty to the probably one of the most hated teams, but I guess success is always hated to some degree, because people
nobody hated them when I was a first a fan. So
yeah, exactly. So last question before we jump into final words for you is, what are 3 books that you recommend any person to read, and why?
Well, I think the first book that really stood out to me was Good to Great, Jim Collins. And in there, there's specifically the level 5 leadership. And when you key in on the level 5 leadership and what that is, that gave me a new idea of what leadership could be, which is it's a combination of humility and fierce resolve. And I think the leaders that exhibit those characteristics are more effective. And I've always had those, but I didn't know I had permission to use them until I read that book. So Good to Great's a great book. First, Break All the Rules is one of my absolute favorite books that have been written on leadership. It's what the world's greatest managers do differently. And this is, of course, a Gallup organization that did a lot of research into that. And that kind of came up with some things in there that went against what I believed in the military. So one is spend more time with your good employees than your bad employees, and build relationships with your good employees. And, military was always like, I'm here, you're there. We don't cross the streams, if you will. But at the end of the day, you want to do that. So that was a really good book. Probably, let's see. I would have to say Angela Duckworth. Grit is always something that that sits deep in my soul, because I believe that most of my career has been defined by grit, which is not giving up, being persevere, but it's perseverance with passion. You have a passion for something that's so important that you're willing to break down walls to get there. Grit is something I look for when I'm hiring employees. Give me examples of where you displayed grit in your life and in your career. So those may be 3 books that I would, off the top of my head, that I would recommend to anyone.
I like all 3 of those books based on how you summarize them. So I may have to add some to some portion of my bookshelf somewhere. But anyway, so thank you for sharing that. And just a quick kind of like admin note before we kick it over to you, Jon, for your final words. For those watching, please feel free to subscribe, like, comment, all that fun stuff. Engage with the content. Also reach out to Jon or follow him on LinkedIn. He grabbed his books on Amazon store, wherever you can find those. Again, I have the watch, all in the same boat, and I have the watch journal. So I have at least 2 of them here, and I must say they're very useful in tandem, and very easy to follow day by day instructions that I backlog a few days, so let's just say that.
You're allowed to. I say that in the book.
So I know you say that. It's okay though, but I have to. So overall, great work here, and I wish you the greatest of luck in your endeavors. And I hope that my viewers and anyone who views this podcast has something to take away, and will also search out more lessons from you. So we will go ahead and kick it over to your final words. Just give me a thumbs up whenever you are complete. And here we go.
So my final words for you is something that I share, especially with young people, is I will say this: don't be a nub. And you might be asking yourself, what is a nub? Well, on a submarine, when you first get on board, you're not qualified. So you have you don't know how any of the systems work. You're not qualified to watch to stand any watch stations, and you're called a nub, which is a non-useful body. So you are stealing food and oxygen from the people who are useful. And so one of the things that they teach you on a submarine is become valuable as quick as you can. So earn your oxygen. So I would say, as you go throughout your career, go out throughout your life, are you a nub? Are you a non-useful body? Or are you adding value in the world, right? Are you a consumer? Or are you a contributor? Are you creating, or are you consuming? We live in a consuming culture where we like to take, whether it's entertainment, whether it's music, where we want to take. And what are you doing, though, as a person to create? What are you doing to put your own personal dent in the universe? And so what I would say to you, last words is, don't be a nub. Don't be a non-useful body. Be useful, add value, do great things. And thanks for listening in.